Hello, dear viewers. Welcome to the 7th episode of the series, The Ledger. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss a single episode of this series in which the victims are cursed and turned into animals. You can also support us by liking the video and leaving your lovely comments. Enjoy the show.
There is a certain kind of person who believes the whole living world is simply waiting to be broken to their hand. Horses, servants, rivals, anything with a will of its own is, to them, merely a problem of sufficient force. I have filled a great many pages with such people, and I have noticed they all share one blindness. They never once imagine the bridle turning around. Tonight my candle burns low over an open field of sunlight and applause, because far below me a champion is about to learn which side of the reins she truly belongs on. This is entry number 8. Her name was Adrienne Vance, and she was, by every trophy the sport could award, its finest and its cruelest rider. 29 years old, straight-backed, chestnut-haired, with a champion's cold and flawless smile. She ruled her academy the way a tyrant rules a small country. She saluted the judges without warmth and rode into the arena as though the crowd, the horse, and the very sand existed to obey her. Everything obeys. She liked to say, if you break it correctly. The stands adored her for her victories. Not one of them had ever asked the horse. I watched her ride that day, and it was not sport. It was subjugation dressed in ribbons. She forced her great bay horse over jump after jump with the crop, its ears pinned flat, its eyes white with strain, sand tearing beneath its hooves. To the crowd, it looked like mastery. To me, who keeps a longer account than any crowd, it looked exactly like what it was. A living creature being punished for the crime of not being a machine. She never rode a horse in her life. She only ever wore one down. And it was not only horses. Between rounds, she leaned from her saddle to flay a young stable hand at the rail, a thin boy in a gray uniform who flinched at her voice, as her horse flinched at her crop for a strap left one hole too loose for the sin of existing beneath her. She broke people with the same economy she broke animals, quietly, publicly, and without ever raising a hand. That, dear reader, is the flaw I had come to collect. Cruelty that calls itself excellence. Now here is where Adrienne's story differs from every entry before hers, for I did not arrive on her desk in the dark. I was already in her hands. That worn leather book she carried everywhere. The training ledger in which she recorded every animal she had ever broken. Every will she had ever bent, that book was me. She had been writing in me for years and never once suspected what she was writing in. So between rounds, when she opened her ledger to log another conquest, she found a new entry writing itself in golden ink. In her own handwriting, her name, and beside it, a small rearing horse. The record keeper had become the record. She told herself it was nothing. A trick of the sun, a slipped stirrup, a moment's fatigue at the end of a long season. The small, easy lies the proud always reach for first. She snapped the ledger shut, gathered her reins, and straightened that famous spine, certain that whatever this was would obey her the way every other thing in her life had learned to. That is the last mercy I extend to my entries. A few final minutes of believing they are still holding the reins. Adrienne spent hers pretending her own body had not, for the very first time, just refused her. It began, fittingly, in her hands. Not her eyes, not her skin, her hands, the instruments of all that control, the hands that held the crop and the reins and signed the fate of every creature in her stable. There in the saddle, they began to cramp and curl against her will, the fingers stiffening, refusing the leather, refusing her. For the first time in her life, a thing she owned would not answer her command, and the thing was her own body. Then her legs locked down in the stirrups. The muscles went rigid as green wood, her knees seizing, her fine boots straining as her legs simply stopped taking orders. She who prided herself on the perfect seat, the perfect posture, felt her own frame turning to something she could not steer. Panic is a strange sight on a face that has only ever worn command. I watched it arrive, and I confess I did not look away. She opened her mouth to shout a command, a curse, anything to reassert the authority that had never once failed her, and what came out was a whinny. Loud, raw, unmistakably equine, ringing across the arena for every ear to hear. The front rows recoiled, hands flying to mouths. There is no humiliation quite like it. the voice that had cowed 100 stable hands now breaking into the cry of the very animal she despised, in front of thousands. The crowd she performed for had begun, at last, to see her clearly. Her bay horse felt the shift before anyone. It felt the hand on the reins turn weak. The master's will drain out through the leather, and it did what she had never once permitted it to do. It reared, and it threw her. She left the saddle backward, arms wheeling, her crop spinning away into the sand, and the crowd rose in a single gasp. The reins had turned around. They always do in the end. I simply keep the book that promises it. She landed hard in the churned sand of her own arena, the same ground into which she had driven so many others, and caught herself on her hands. But one of them was no longer a hand. The fingers had fused, the skin darkened and hardened, a hoof pressing into the sand where a fist had been an hour before. She stared at it, this champion, this breaker of wills, sprawled in the dirt with the sun overhead and 10,000 eyes upon her, and for the first time understood that the transformation was not a threat. It was a verdict already carried out. And then the bay horse came to stand over her, not to trample to look. It lowered its great head and regarded her calmly, patiently, from exactly the height at which she had always regarded it, while she lay small and changing in its shadow. I have staged many reversals in my long life, dear reader, but few so perfect as this: the master on her back in the sand, the animal standing over her at last as an equal, and neither of them, for one silent moment, able to look away. She had spent her life teaching that horse who was beneath whom. It had finally learned the lesson she meant to teach. The mane came next, bursting in a thick dark ridge down the length of her spine and splitting the seams of that immaculate riding jacket she wore like armor. Her chestnut hair, always bound in its severe champion's knot, spilled loose and coarsened into the same wild crest. The uniform of her authority tore open along her back, and out of it grew the very thing she had spent a career dominating: the costume of the master, coming apart to reveal the shape of the ruled. Only now did her eyes change, and I chose that order deliberately, for her eyes were the last of her cruelty to surrender. Those sharp, appraising eyes that had looked down on every living thing in her orbit, slowly widened and darkened into the great liquid brown of a horse, set wider on a lengthening face. The way she looked at the world had been the truest weapon she owned. It was fitting that it should be among the last things I took, and the thing she would miss the most. Her face pushed forward into a muzzle, velvet-nostriled, dark, unmistakable, the fine brown hair sweeping up over cheeks that had never known a blush of shame until this afternoon. It happened in full view of the grandstand, the judges, the boy she had berated at the rail, the entire audience she had always played to, now watching the performance end in a way no one had sold tickets for. She had wanted, her whole life, to be looked at. I granted her that wish completely. There was one moment left of the woman. Her face was a horse's now, long and noble and strange, but her eyes for a breath longer were still human, still Adrienne, wide and dark and brimming. And down that new muzzle rolled a single tear into the sand. Whatever it carried, regret, terror, the grief of a life measured only in trophies, I recorded it faithfully. Then I let the last of her expression settle into the calm blankness of the animal, and the woman who broke things was gone. Her legs finished it. They lengthened and buckled backward into the powerful hind limbs of a horse, her polished boots splitting apart at the seams, her fine breeches tearing away as hooves formed where a champion's heels had gripped so many flanks. The body that had sat so perfectly astride others now dropped, at last, onto four legs of its own, the only posture I think that was ever honest for her. And so she rose, a magnificent chestnut mare, glossy and powerful, climbing to her feet in the center of the arena out of a sad little heap of torn navy cloth and broken boots, her crop lying forgotten in the sand. Her bay horse watched from a few feet away, unhurried, no longer afraid. The dusk light poured gold across the ring where she had won 100 ribbons, and she stood in it, transformed, stripped of every title but one livestock. Turn and look at them, dear reader, the crowd, the very audience she had spent her life performing for, on their feet, hands over mouths, some pointing, some turning away, the judges frozen at their table. She had always fed on their eyes, their applause, their envy. Now she stood exposed before all of it as the thing she truly was, and the sound she had lived for curdled into gasps and silence. The cruelest part of any spectacle is the moment the spectacle becomes you. By the next morning, the trophies had been quietly taken down, and the story the crowd told itself had already begun to soften into something it could bear to believe. But I do not soften, I finish. In the gray light of the stable, a stranger's weathered hands buckled a plain leather halter over her long face, drawing the straps snug behind her ears. She stood for it, what else could she do? The champion who had strapped 1,000 bridles onto unwilling heads now felt the leather tighten over her own, and her great dark eyes, still holding some last ember of the woman, could only watch the wall. Obedience, she had always said, comes when a thing is broken correctly. She was learning how correct she had been. And who do you suppose held her lead rope? The boy. The thin young stable hand she had flayed at the rail, now standing calm and quiet at her shoulder, the rope loose in his steady hand, entirely in control of her. On the bench beside them lay her own training ledger, open the book in which she had catalogued every creature she ever broke, now cataloging her. The academy had a new mare to gentle. The last cruelty, dear reader, is always the tidy one. Nothing wasted, everything filed. I closed her account there. On the page she herself had ruled and lined, in the same golden ink that once wrote lesser names. Adrienne broken, beside it, a small rearing horse, and the little golden horseshoe I stamp on the finished ones. No dust scattered to the wind for her, no gallop into an open field. Some entries I set free. This one I filed, exactly as she filed everything she ever conquered, in the ledger she never knew she'd been keeping on herself. She wanted a world that obeyed. I gave her a stall in it. But close the book gently, my ink is already stirring toward the next name. Somewhere above this city there is a woman of impeccable taste and glacial warmth who collects admirers the way others collect ornaments and discards them just as lightly. Certain that affection is something owed to her and never something owed in return. She has never had to chase anyone in her life. My next page holds her already. Platinum hair, ice blue eyes narrowing to slits, elegant ears rising through her curls. Entry number 9 is coming, and this one will land on her feet, or think she will. Subscribe and be here when I open. After all, I would so hate for the next name I write to belong to someone who wasn't watching.